Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Today, which is week 7, we'll be covering the Dhātuvibhaṅga Sutta, which comes to us from the Majjhima Nikāya, or the middle-length Discourses of Lord Buddha, from the Pali Canon, and it's Majjhima Nikāya number 140. Dhātuvibhaṅga Sutta. So it can loosely be translated as classification of the elements, or classification, enumeration, elaborations on the elements, etc. As I was mentioning earlier today, before our sit, I chose the sutta because it is linked up to the other occurrences that happened in the time of the Buddha, where 5 bhikkhus from a previous lifetime, who were colleagues to each other, companions on the path at the time of Lord Kassapa Buddha's dispensation, when they had made the resolution to go ahead and seclude themselves on top of a cliff and to meditate there, because they realized that the teachings were dying in a sense. People were not practicing them as well as they should. So they made this resolve, and they went on top of this cliff and threw away the ladder to meditate and to never retreat until they've attained the Magga and Phala, which is path and fruit of the attainments. So one of them became an arahant within a few days, and then another one became an anagami, which is a non-returner. So the other 5 remained there until they expired, they died. And they didn't need anyone. They refused the help of the other bhikkhus who had reached sublime states and also psychic states, where they were able to bring them food. They even brought them food, but they refused because they said that is not the reason why they had made that resolve, that determination. So when they died, after a certain period of time had passed, we're talking about millions of years, they started to show up at the time of the Buddha, our Buddha, Gautama. And when a person has worked on their paramis, their perfections, they have enough merits, and their trajectory has been set in a way because of their intentions behind their actions, and the accumulation of their merits allowed them to be in the presence of another Buddha. And that's how we had Dabba, for example, which I briefly talked about in the previous sutta study class, when I was also doing the Bāhiya sutta. He became an arahant at the age of 7. And then we saw how in the last session, how Bāhiya, Daruchiriya, became an arahant at the end of, and he was the quickest to attain, in the sense that just he took what the Buddha said and then he just got it on the spot. And then unfortunately he died. So those were 2 of those 5 that had appeared at the time of the Buddha. This is, you can call him Bhikkhu number 3 from that group of 5. And obviously in this life, he was not a Bhikkhu, because we're going to see him be, well, I'll just jump into it. His name was Pukkusāti, and he was born as royalty, and he had become a king. of a region that today can be seen to be in Pakistan, pretty much in the center of Pakistan, modern day, and in a place called Taxila. Taxila was also the first, the site of the first Buddhist university, and many scholars agreed that it was the very first university in the world. If we don't look at probably, ancient Egypt, etc. So Taxila was the place where the kingdom of King Pukkusāti was. So how the commentaries present this, the introduction, how they introduce rather Pukkusāti into the canon, is that he had sent his emissaries, his ministers, to the kingdom of Rajgir, to the kingdom of Magadha, which was one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful kingdom of India at that time. That is where you had King Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara was the same king who had seen Siddhartha Gautama when he was on his way to becoming an Arahant, into becoming the Buddha. And he was so impressed by the Bodhisattva, at the time he was not the Buddha yet, that he had his messengers follow him, his spies follow him, and they found out that he was living in a cave. But he was so impressed with the way that he was walking, his presence, and his demeanor, that he himself went, the King Bimbisara went to him, and he promised him his half his kingdom. He said, "You're so, you're noble. You have it in you. It's in your blood. I would be honored if you can actually, take half of my kingdom." And Siddhartha Gautama said, "No, I've already left my kingdom. What are you talking about? I'm after a bigger prize. I'm after Buddhahood. I seek full awakening." And King Bimbisara pleaded with with Siddhartha that once he did attain, interesting how much of a faith he had in him, because he knew that this young man was going to attain, that once he did attain Buddhahood, that he would return back to Rajgir and teach him the Dhamma. And the Buddha, of course, after becoming the Buddha, he did fulfill that promise, and he went, and that's how we had King Bimbisara become a Sotapanna. He was a stream winner, stream enterer. So the emissaries of King Pukkusāti had reached the kingdom of King Bimbisara, and they were engaging. And one of the questions that King Bimbisara asked the ministers and the messengers of King Pukkusāti was, "How is your king? How does he govern his kingdom? How does he treat his people?" Interesting how, today's modern world, we don't have such rulers, it seems, where he's interested how this ruler treats his own public. And they say, there's a certain classification. Like, how does he treat the elderly? How does he treat the poor? There's a percentage of time, for example, where the king would open up his treasury to give to the impoverished. And for, let's say, 5 years or 20 years, whatever it is, interest-free funding to help them improve their welfare. And then they would go ahead and pay back the king. For such a long time, they would work and establish themselves, come out of debt, etc. So anyhow, he was so impressed that he requested from the messengers that King Pukkusāti become a friend of his, because he was so impressed. And so the messengers go back and forth, and it's about 1,300 plus miles, by the way, from Rajgir to Taxila, a long distance. So, and obviously, so there's this development of a strong friendship, even though they never met one another, these two kings. So, and then King Pukkusāti sends gifts, very, very precious types of fabric. I think they're called mulsin. And they would be made of very, very fine cotton and silk. And he puts them in different boxes, sandalwood, gold, silver, etc. And he sends it to King Bimbisara. Now, King Bimbisara receives it, and he's so impressed he wants to send something, but to top it. That's how they, would work. And he realizes after he does the whole analysis in his mind that, you know what? There's nothing that I could send him of this world that is of true value to my heart and that could really be considered a treasure. So he advises his ministers to make for him a strip of gold, pure gold, that was going to be used almost like a manuscript, but it's made out of a thin sheet of gold, which was the length, I think they say in the commentaries, anywhere from half a cubit to 3 cubits. Cubit is about, from your elbow to your middle finger, tip of it, I think. And so 3 times that and a half, so it's a long strip. And he goes and isolates himself. He washes himself, his hair and all that. So he goes, just like in an uposatha. So he takes his precepts and he prepares his mind. He secludes himself in his chamber by himself and starts to write down the qualities of Lord Buddha and the qualities of the Dhamma and the qualities of the Sangha. So, iti piso bhagava arahan samma sambuddho. And then he goes, svakato bhagavata dhammo sandita. And then he goes, supatipanno bhagavato sa. So the qualities, the 3, when we pay reverence, venerate the triple gem. And then he breaks down the Eightfold Path and he explains it to him as a layperson. And he does it, they say, in the most exquisite, eloquent way of writing. And then he wraps it up and he in the gold foil and he puts it in a box made of gold. And he takes that box, puts it in a box that's made of silver. And then he puts it in another box that's made of sandalwood, which is very fragrant and ruby covered. And all, the commentaries go into a long, lengthy explanation. So a box within a box within a box, etc. And then with this very special procession, he has it be carried on an elephant. And he himself walks with them and out of his gates and out of his cities. And he advises the ministers of King Pukkusāti who are taking this. One of them, he goes and whispers to his ear and says, make sure when only you speak to the king and say, before he opens this gift, that he goes and isolates himself in the uppermost chamber away from his queens and his attendants. And he opens it up on his own in private. And he reads, he doesn't say what it is. So it happens. And with huge celebration, King Pukkusāti on his end in Taxila receives this procession, and he hears his own minister say to him the direction that he had received from Bimbisara. And he takes the gift and he goes all the way up to his chamber and he opens it up. And that becomes a life transformation for him. And he reads it and he immediately, all the merits from his past lives come, as it were, greeting him as he's reading, because he goes, this is it. This is it. And suddenly, without knowing, they say, he starts folding his legs together, sits upright, and goes into the first jhana. Now, of course, there were directions that King Bimbisara had mentioned. Some of the instructions from whatever he had learned from Lord Buddha as an upasaka. So he stays like that going in and out of jhanas, reading and rereading and rereading for about 2 weeks. And he just had a young boy who came and brought him food during those 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the people get anxious outside because they're waiting for their king, because they saw this procession and he went up to his, palace and he didn't come out, and they loved him, his people. So they're starting to worry and they think there's something mischievous going on. And they want their ruler back. And King Pukkusāti takes a hold of his, I guess, royal ponytail, if you want to call it that, cuts it, and it had a huge golden ring attached, like a hair clip, I guess, with ruby incrustations on it, encrusted. And he cuts that and he throws it out into the public from his window and says, "There's your ruler." And then he shaves his head, he cuts it as best as he can, and he puts on some robes, and then he walks out. He cuts his beard, he shaves it, and then he's leaving, and his own attendants don't even recognize him as he's coming down the stairs. But then they soon go into the room and see that, where's our king? And he's gone. And they're like, oh, that was him. So they follow him, and everybody's sobbing and crying. And he says, no, I've made my decision. So long story short, I'm trying to actually shorten it further and further than what is so much, it's so much delicious material here to inspire us in our practice. And because I find it extremely important to get the backstory of suttas, because there's so much wealth of knowledge and information there. So he leaves his kingdom and he draws a line with a piece of stick, and he says, in a sense, this is your kingdom, this is mine, as he's walking away to his public, and everybody's in mourning and all that, because, as I said, they loved him. So he joins a caravan that's going south from Taxila. Pakistan is north of India, northeast. So he's coming down. The thing that he doesn't ask, or he didn't have the chance because he was so driven, that at that time Lord Buddha was in Savatthi. Because King Bimbisara is in Rajgir, he immediately concludes that, oh, Lord Buddha is in Rajgir too. Well, there's a discrepancy about 340 miles plus between the two cities. So the caravan passes through Savatthi. So he stays in Savatthi for a little while, for a few hours, and then the caravan continues down south towards Rajgir. Again, 340 plus miles. Once he gets there, he is looking around for Lord Buddha, and they say, well, he's up north. Where are you coming from? Oh, I came from Savatthi. Oh, that's where he was. So he goes, fine, let me rest before I go back. So this is the time that where the sutta is taking place at this point. Now, what the sutta doesn't say, but the commentaries do, is that every morning at dawn, Lord Buddha would scan the universe with his Buddha eye to see who would be most ready, who's right there on the cusp of awakening. How can he help? And he saw clearly that Pukkusāti was right there, but he had overshot his journey in a sense. So he had gone to Rajgir. And the Buddha puts his things in order and he starts walking the 344 miles down to Rajgir. Now, some people say, well, why didn't he fly there or just appear and disappear, right? Which he has normally done, like we've seen in different suttas and throughout the Nikāyas, we see this. Well, as a teacher, he always was concerned, especially as Lord Buddha, as Samma Sambuddha, he is always considering his actions and his behavior, always, for posterity. As in, if Pukkusāti has come 1,300 plus miles down from his kingdom by walking, He didn't even ride a horse or an ox. He came all the way walking, and he passed Savatthi, and he's now walked all the way down to Rajgir. I, as his teacher, must do the same. And in this case, the commentary is interesting because it says the Buddha went incognito. He didn't go with his whole Buddha splendor, meaning displaying his brilliance and radiance, because that is unavoidable. People would see him normally with his radiance, and especially after he would give a Dhamma talk, they say the 6 rays would come out of him. You can call it the aura, and everybody, it was unmistakable. People from far and wide would see it, and they would rush to see what's happening, where's the source. But he didn't choose to do that this time. And perhaps we can discover more. So I know it's a long sutta, so I try to also fill in as much as I can. But I want to do it in one sitting today, the whole sutta, and I'll go as fast as I can, in a fair manner, of course, and also leave hopefully room for you guys to ask me questions. All right, so here we go. Okay. Dhātuvibhaṅga Sutta, Majjhima Nikāya 140. And this is a translation I worked on this week to finish, to make it more satisfactory, in fact, and more current. I have personally heard this. At one time, the Blessed One was walking through the Magadhan country in Rajagha when he reached Bhagava, the potter's workshop. And by the way, that is where, I won't give away that part. Bhagava, the potter's workshop. After exchanging cordial greetings with him, the Blessed One asked, if it is not inconvenient to you, householder, I wish to spend one night resting in your workshop. Bhante, this is Bhagava responding. Bhagava, there is a recluse who has just arrived earlier and is now staying at my workshop. If he does not mind, then you may stay here also, and for as long as you like, answered Bhagava the potter. Meanwhile, a certain recluse by the name of Pukkusāti, who had recently left the lay life and become homeless out of faith in the Blessed One, had just arrived and was resting at the potter's workshop. Then the Blessed One, in approaching the Venerable Pukkusāti, said to him, if it is not inconvenient to the bhikkhu present, I will spend one night here at the workshop. Friend, you may stay here for as long as you wish in this potter's workshop, for it is not inconvenient, replied Pukkusāti, the recluse. Friend is a term that you say to equals. And the term in Pali is avuso. And at the time of the Buddha, bhikkhus used to use that term to each other. One of the things that the Buddha instituted at the time of his death, in fact, he told Ananda to have this practice be stopped, in a sense, between a younger bhikkhu and an elder bhikkhu. An elder bhikkhu can turn to the younger novice or a younger bhikkhu and say avuso, which is friend, if they choose to, or they can choose their name, say their name. But that's where we have the Bhante part come in. Bhante, they would say that. So here he was saying avuso, so he was seeing him as an equal, in a sense, as a similar recluse, because the Buddha was incognito, let's not forget that. And it's interesting how we see Venerable Pukkusāti here, even though it's not his domain, his dwelling place, still he's the only one there. and how he was generous with his space. Today in this world, we have a situation where, unfortunately, this generosity it seems to be running low on gas. In a sense, people are becoming more and more possessive of their spaces, which, by the way, in the case of the Sangha, it is not even ours. It comes from you, the upasakas and upasikas who support the Sangha. So even in the commentaries, they mention this, how foolish monks, and vain monks, and they even have a term for them. They call them mogha purisa. Purisa is a human. Mogha means like foolish, basically. Are so miserly that they want to hold on to their space. No, you go over there and sit under the tree, far away from, because this is my space. So this accommodation that is being generously provided on part of Pukkusāti, because he's now the lord of that workshop, which, by the way, has all kinds of stuff going around. Like you have rats, you have chickens, you have cats, you have animal excrement here and there, you have, grass, it's dusty, pottery here and there. So I wanted to mention that because I've also been on the receiving end of that during the past year or so, as a homeless bhikkhu. So it makes one think of the relevancy of what the commentaries here have been saying about being generous with one's space as bhikkhus, because it doesn't belong to us. And let's continue. Then the Blessed One entered the potter's workshop, and after making a spread of dried grass in a suitable area that was clean, he collected his legs by placing them into a sitting position and established mindfulness in front of him. In this manner, the Blessed One sat in meditation far into the night in his seated posture. Similarly, the Venerable Pukkusāti also spent most of the night in the seated posture. Now, King Pukkusāti had not just stayed at the first jhana level. He had developed his practice and got it all the way to the fourth jhana. And what we'll see is how he is not sleeping. He had just come from a long journey, hundreds of miles, but he is not sleeping. He has every excuse to sleep. His body is tired. But one of the wonderful things about the fourth jhana is that it allows you, the equanimity gets so deep that you can disassociate, and that's actually one of the requirements, from the body, in the sense that it doesn't become loud anymore. Only when something touches the body that you become cognizant of the body. Otherwise, you're in a very deep, still state of calm and relaxation mentally. The term is piti manasa kayang pasambati. The joy arises when the body is relaxed. So the fourth jhana allows the person, the meditator, to reach that state. And this is one of the reasons why it's interesting, because we also can conclude that if King Pukkusāti had not gone into the jhana state, his body was in so much pain from walking over 300 miles that he would not have been taught anything. And seeing what's about to happen the next day, we could have understood why the Buddha would like to come in and quickly teach Pukkusāti the Dhamma. But he didn't. Just like in the case of Bāhiya, which we saw, 3 times he asked until the Buddha actually taught him, because he had been running from all the way from an area near Mumbai, modern day Mumbai, which is a long way as well. to Savatthi. So here too we see Lord Buddha not quickly jumping in to teach Pukkusāti. So he's allowing Venerable Pukkusāti to have his mind rest, to come to a point of rest. And staying in the jhanic state for some time was helpful. Some people say that, well, Rajgir was a very noisy city, so to teach the Dhamma in a noisy environment was not an opportune thing to do for Lord Buddha. That's why he delayed it until midnight. I have, my feelings are different than that. I think it's the first because he was extremely tired, Pukkusāti. Meanwhile, Lord Buddha is also in the, Phala Samapatti, is in the fruition stage of, jhana, and is just, bliss of Nibbana he's experiencing. And he observes Pukkusāti, how he's so collected, he's not moving. They say the Buddha arrived there at sunset. And this was around midnight. So we're talking about 6 hours or so. Not moving. Some of you students that I tell, don't move when you're sitting. Let's continue. And then it occurred to the Blessed One, this clansman dedication to his practice is inspiring and pleasing to behold. I will now question him. And the Blessed One asked the Venerable Pukkusāti the following. Bhikkhu, by having faith in whom have you gone forth and thus went into homelessness? Who is your teacher? Whose teaching do you carry in your heart? Now the Buddha knew that Pukkusāti became a monk out of reverence for him. But he decided to ask him because if he didn't do so, then there would not be a point of entry into a conversation. So he's making, the opening, the prelude to a conversation to start it and to pave the way for the Dhamma to take place. And here's where Venerable Pukkusāti responds. He says, friend, there is the recluse Gautama, the son of the Sakyans, who has gone forth and become homeless. Now, a great fame has been spread about that blessed Gautama, that the Blessed One is an Arahant, perfectly self-awakened, the possessor of supreme knowledge and conduct, the well-gone, the knower of worlds, the peerless charioteer and trainer of beings, the teacher of gods and humans, the enlightened one and the exalted. I went forth into homelessness by having faith in him. That Blessed One is my teacher. It is his Dhamma that I carry in my heart. I mean, we can almost see the majestic smile on Lord Buddha's face in hearing this, and seeing the faith generated in the heart of Venerable Pukkusāti. And he continues asking, and where, Bhikkhu, would you say the perfectly self-awakened one, this exalted one, is living now? Friend, there is a city located within the northeastern territories in a township named Savatthi. And that is where the perfectly self-awakened, the exalted one, is living now. And have you, Bhikkhu, seen the Blessed One yourself? Would you recognize him if you were to see him? Asked the Lord. Somebody should make a movie of this. No, friend, answered Pukkusāti as he continued. I have not personally seen the Blessed One, and therefore I will not be able to recognize him if I were to see him. Then it occurred to the Blessed One. This clansman has gone forth and become homeless by having faith in me. I will now teach him the Dhamma. And the Blessed One addressed the Venerable Pukkusāti. The question itself, as to Lord Buddha's question, as to who does he have faith in, who placed his faith in. When we hear questions like that, even in our lives, it kind of reshuffles the, it triggers, it instigates within us. It moves away the gray ash so that we can see the embers of the things that brought us to the path. So it brings out saddha, the faith and confidence in us, which is essential to hear the Dhamma, to practice the Dhamma, to realize the Dhamma. So here with Lord Buddha's question, it's so ingenious, it's so perfect, because now Venerable Pukkusāti's body is relaxed, yes, but also in his heart, in his mind, faith was brought into focus. And he is now ready to receive the Dhamma, which is, by the way, Lord Buddha. Because Lord Buddha said so many times, he who sees the Dhamma sees me. He who sees me, the Buddha, sees the Dhamma. They're the same thing. Then the Buddha continues, Bhikkhu, I will teach you the Dhamma. Listen and pay close attention to what I shall say. And the Venerable Pukkusāti replied, yes, friend. The Blessed One continued, Bhikkhu, a person is comprised of 6 elements, 6 bases of contact, 18 mental explorations, and 4 resolutions. When confronted by these, one should not get flooded by these imaginings. When no longer preoccupied by these notions, thus, one is declared as the peaceful sage. In this manner, one diligently protects truth by no longer neglecting wisdom, while developing a deeper understanding of giving up and training oneself in becoming more peaceful. This is the short exposition on the classification of the 6 elements. And what was meant, Bhikkhu, by the statement, a person is comprised of 6 elements? This is in reference to the earth element, the water element, the fire element, the wind element, the space element, and the consciousness or sense awareness element. Therefore, Bhikkhu, in hearing that a person is comprised of 6 elements, you should understand the meaning of that statement in this manner. So here we see how in the Dhātuvibhaṅga Sutta, what's being advocated is that the grasping, the holding on to these 6 elements before the person's death will lead to a rebirth, to a descent into a womb, as they say, because consciousness, the very last one, is the thing that is being adhered to. And because of consciousness, as we see in the Paticcasamuppada law of the 12 links of causal relations, consciousness will be leading one into Namarupa, which is name and form. So that's why what's being advocated here is to stop the descent into a womb by cutting it right there at the consciousness level, which we'll go deeper into in a bit. So let's continue. And what was meant, Bhikkhu, by the statement, a person is comprised of 6 bases of contact? This is in reference to the base of eye contact, the base of ear contact, the base of nose contact, the base of tongue contact, the base of body contact, and the base of mind contact. Therefore, Bhikkhu, in hearing that a person is comprised of 6 bases of contact, you should understand the meaning of that statement in this manner. Many people say, I was taught for years that the Buddha's Dhamma is, the teachings are just a collection of numbers, classifications. Yes, they do serve a major purpose, but that is not just it. When we leave the scholarly hat aside and we go into the practice of the Dhamma, we start to see how these classifications take a person straight out of samsara in the form of cutting one loose from the attachments that we hold. Specifically, in this case, the mind objects that we hold so dearly, the perceptions, the concepts, specifically the concepts, the principles that we learn in the Dhamma, because it's so easy for us to become so attached to them. However, when we look at them as mere classifications in a way that a dissection chart would work in a lab, in biology lab, if we look at them in that fashion, just like in the case of the eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, etc., what we're doing is we are releasing this strong, strong bond. We are dismantling this huge rope, those ropes that pull in a huge, massively big oil tankers closer and closer to the dock, to the port. If you look closer to those ropes, they're made of smaller ropes. And you take a look at those ropes, and then you see that they're made of even smaller and smaller until you actually get to the fibers that make up these ropes. So let's continue. And what was meant, Bhikkhu, by the statement, a person is comprised of 18 mental explorations? On seeing a form with the eye, the mind starts looking for enjoyable properties within the object being seen, or it starts looking for bothersome properties within the object being seen, or it starts looking for equanimous properties within the object being seen. On hearing a sound with the ear, the mind starts looking for enjoyable properties within the object being heard, or it starts looking for bothersome properties within the object being heard, or it starts looking for equanimous properties within the object being heard. As you can tell, I'm reading each of these 18 properties because I find it, the reason why I started translating and recording the suttas in full is this, because the Buddha, I don't think or believe in my bones that he used ellipses in any shape, way, or form. He explained it as a good teacher should. So that's why I'm reading everything, and because it helps the mind to settle. Whatever was missed in the earlier sentence can be captured in another sentence if it is continuously being repeated. So please bear that in mind. On smelling an odor with the nose, the mind starts looking for enjoyable properties within the object being smelled, or it starts looking for bothersome properties within the object being smelled, or it starts looking for equanimous properties within the object being smelled. On tasting a flavor with the tongue, the mind starts looking for enjoyable properties within the object being tasted, or it starts looking for bothersome properties within the object being tasted, or it starts looking for equanimous properties within the object being tasted. On touching a tactile object with the body, the mind starts looking for enjoyable properties within the object being touched, or it starts looking for bothersome properties within the object being touched, or it starts looking for equanimous properties within the object being touched. On knowing a mental object with the mind starts looking for enjoyable properties within the object being known, or it starts looking for bothersome properties within the object being known, or it starts looking for equanimous properties within the object being known. Therefore, Bhikkhu, in hearing that a person is comprised of 18 mental explorations, you should understand the meaning of that statement in this manner. And what was meant, Bhikkhu, by the statement, a person is comprised of 4 resolutions? This is in reference to the resolution of wisdom, the resolution of truth, the resolution of giving up, and the resolution of peace. Therefore, Bhikkhu, in hearing that a person is comprised of 4 resolutions, you should understand the meaning of that statement in this manner. It's quite interesting because as I rereading this, something that I've read a few times, suddenly I got the image of both Kings Bimbisara and King Pukkusāti, especially King Pukkusāti, who was unraveling his gift from King Bimbisara, one box after the other. The outermost box, they say it was made out of lacquer. And then you look inside that and there's a wooden specially made with lapis lazuli and, amethyst and things, probably. And then there's another one with rubies and silver. You're unraveling, removing one box out of another box. Similarly, when we are reading this, listening to this very beautiful, valuable sutta, the Dhātuvibhaṅga, we are being, one after the other. These principles are being pulled out of another box that encapsulated them. And then we go deeper in another sentence, in another teaching that comes a little bit later, and we see how the Buddha is unraveling the gift of Dhamma to King or Venerable Pukkusāti here. So that's an image that I wish to share with you. And what was meant, Bhikkhu, by the statement? One diligently protects truth by no longer neglecting wisdom, while developing a deeper understanding of giving up and training oneself in becoming more peaceful. And how, Bhikkhu, does one diligently protect truth by no longer neglecting wisdom? Here, one sees the 6 elements as they are. That is, the earth element, the water element, the fire element, the wind element, the space element, and the consciousness or sense awareness element. And here he breaks it down, each of these. And what, Bhikkhu, is meant here by the earth element? Here, the earth element may be seen internally or externally. And what is meant by earth element that is seen internally? Here, Bhikkhu, whatever is experienced internally within oneself or externally as a solid, or has the quality of hardness and is attached to oneself, is seen as the earth element, such as head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, veins, bones, bone marrow, kidney, heart, liver, lungs, spleen, intestines, large intestines, solid contents of the belly, feces, and any other substance that are solid or hard, taking place internally, seen as personal and looked upon as one's own. Whether looking at these internally or externally, these are all seen as simply the earth element. Looking upon them as these are not mine, I am not found in them. There is no trace of a self to be found in them. Thus, as one looks upon these again and again as they really are, with correct understanding and wisdom, the mind gets disenchanted with the earth element and becomes dispassionate towards it. Your jawbone, how beautiful is it? The cavities in your teeth, the cavities that hold your eyeballs, your femur, the biggest, longest bones in your body, my femur. See what's happening already? Just a tiny little switch or change in formulating it. Instead of looking at it, this is me. This is where I am found in my bone marrow or something. Instead, you're dissecting it. So what the Dhātuvibhaṅga Sutta is allowing us to do is trying to reveal this magician's veil, to kind of expose the trick that the mind plays here, is to allow us to have the elements fade away in their significance, in their crystallized, accepted solid form in our mind, solid in the sense that this is me, this is mine. So the Dhātuvibhaṅga is trying to say the jig is up. I am revealing this whole magic trick. And the term is virajayati, fading away from the mind. So it's trying to erase the bond, the connection, the shackle rather, that the elements have on the mind itself. And Venerable Sariputta was known to explain this in the Sammaditi Sutta and elsewhere throughout the Nikāyas, where he would describe the elements always in the form of, head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, and touch, skin, basically. Because these things can become oftentimes the area, the thing that secludes us and keeps us in comfort with this sense of conceit, the conceit I am. What I'm referring to is the constant comparison that we do. Me versus you. I am sitting here, you're sitting there. My level of attainment versus your level of attainment. My understanding, your understanding. All these things. But when you narrow it down, we see that each packet of a living experience that we undergo, call them individual consciousnesses, is replete, is full of, is drenched in this conceit, I am. And Venerable Sariputta, as well as the Lord Buddha here, always have been advocating to spend some time dissecting this thing that we take for granted. I am this. No, I'm not this. There's hairs, there's body hairs, there's bones, there's saliva, there's feces, Some arahants like Ajahn Mahabua would say, I'm just a bag of feces. Powerful image, right? Or a bag of bones. That never fails to kind of shake us a little bit. So as we're, this is one of those suttas that needs to be read, went over again and again and again. And that's one of the reasons why I'm glad that I'm doing these series on suttas, so that the listener could go back and back, whatever, because I would miss it all the time. So I have to go over and read it again. It's like every time I return back, I pick up something that I missed. It's wonderful. It's a gift that keeps on giving. So fading away from the mind, these elements, allows the mind to become liberated from the elements. Therefore, it doesn't descend into another womb, which is the bottom line. This is the second. Remember, the Buddha taught two things, I say. The first one is there is dukkha. The second one is freedom from dukkha. What is freedom from dukkha? Not descending into another womb, not taking another birth. And the arahants sometimes would joke around amongst themselves and say, the thing to be feared is not death. The thing to be feared is another birth. Stay away from that. And that is what this classification of the elements is trying to do, to help us to avoid the birth into another womb. Let's continue. Further, Bhikkhu, whatever is experienced internally within oneself or externally as watery or having the quality of liquid and is attached to oneself is seen as the water element, such as bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, oil of the body, tears, oil of the eyes, spit, snot, oil of the joints, urine, and any other substance that is liquidy, taking place internally, seen as personal and looked upon as one's own. Whether looking at these internally or externally, these are all seen as simply the water element, which one looks upon now as these are not me. I am not found in them. There is no trace of a self to be found in them. Thus, as one looks upon these again and again as they really are, with correct understanding and wisdom, the mind gets disenchanted with the water element and becomes dispassionate towards it. Further, bhikkhu, whatever is experienced internally within oneself or externally as fiery or having the quality of heat and is attached to oneself is seen as the fire element, such as when things are consumed, enjoyed, drunk, eaten, and tasted, all of which get digested through the process of heat or any other substance that is burning, taking place internally, seen as personal, including your body temperature, by the way, seen as personal and looked upon as one's own. Whether looking at these internally or externally, these are seen as simply the fire element, which one looks upon as, these are not me, I am not found in them. There is no trace of a self to be found in them. Thus, as one looks upon these again and again as they really are, with correct understanding and wisdom, the mind gets disenchanted with the fire element and becomes dispassionate towards it. Further, bhikkhu, whatever is experienced internally within oneself or externally as wind, or sometimes they translate it as air, or has the quality of airiness or movement and is attached to oneself, is seen as the wind element, such as the internal winds that go up and down the body, winds or air in the belly, in the lower portion of the abdomen, winds going up and down the limbs, the in-breaths and out-breaths, and any other airy movement that is taking place internally, seen as personal and looked upon as one's own. Whether looking at these internally or externally, these are all seen as simply the wind element, which one looks upon now as, these are not me, I am not found in them. There is no trace of a self to be found in them. Thus, as one looks upon these again and again as they really are, with correct understanding and wisdom, the mind gets disenchanted with the wind element and becomes dispassionate towards it. By the way, let's not neglect the two key factors there, correct understanding and wisdom. That's what distinguishes Lord Buddha's path from anything else out there. Further, bhikkhu, whatever is experienced internally within oneself or externally as space or having the quality of space or is hollow and is attached to oneself is seen as the space element, such as the internal cavities in the form of space in the earlobes, nostrils, the mouth, the esophagus, larynx, that lead down from the mouth, where anything experienced or enjoyed, drunk, eaten, and tasted is stored, and the spaces through which these move into and out of, or are turned inside out, and any other occurrences involving space that is taking place internally, or seen as personal and looked upon as one's own. Whether looking at these internally or externally, these are all seen as simply the space element, which one looks upon as, these are not me, I am not found in them. There is no trace of a self to be found in them. Thus, as one looks upon these again and again, as they really are, with correct understanding and wisdom, the mind gets disenchanted with the space element and becomes dispassionate towards it. Then what remains is consciousness or sense awareness that is purified and clean, by which something is known as pleasurable, painful, or neither painful nor pleasurable. So here the Buddha distinguishes the rest of the elements from consciousness itself. One can still have an active role vis-a-vis the other elements, but when it comes to the consciousness, the sense awareness of things, feeling warmth, feeling heat, feeling cool, touching something that's frozen, smelling something that is, appalling, the sense awareness itself is just almost, you can say, inert, like inert gases or noble gases in the periodic table that don't react. But the reaction part, if we're using terms from chemistry, the reaction part takes place within the other elements, it seems, right? My relationship to my spleen, for example, my relationship to my indigestion or constipation, which is a lot of patavi or earth element, being obsessed with that. These are just examples. So what remains, Buddha says, is consciousness that is purified and clean, so long as the person is able to identify that these are not me. There is not an iota of a self to be found in these things. So when the person has done their due diligence, by the time that we get to the sixth consciousness, which is in this case the sense awareness element, we've already done our work. There's no birth into any womb, into any form of existence. That's why we can see the emphasis of Venerable Sariputta, or Lord Buddha, in dissecting. In fact, one of the things that we are taught at our ordination, our higher ordination, upasampada, as bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, what happens is the preceptor gives us kesa, loma, naka, danta, and tacho, which are basically head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, and skin, touch. Why? Because it's so quick. Last time we spoke how Venerable Dhamma, the 7-year-old Arahant, he attained Arahantship simply by hearing those terms. Kesa, loma, naka, danta, tacho. By the time that it got to tacho, which is skin, he had become an Arahant. So that's how powerful these classifications are. So they're not just mere classifications, a breakdown of something. They're very involving. They're revealing. Let's continue. And bhikkhu, on account of a pleasurable contact, there arises a pleasurable feeling, and one knows, I feel pleasure. With the cessation of that pleasurable contact, the respective pleasurable feeling also ceases, and one knows that it has subsided. Bhikkhu, on account of a painful contact, there arises a painful feeling, and one knows, I feel pain. With the cessation of that painful contact, the respective painful feeling also ceases, and one knows that it has subsided. We're still talking about the consciousness element here. Because when contact happens, the feeling part of it comes in the form of 3, right? Whether it is pleasurable, whether it is painful, whether it is neutral. It is the contact or the sense awareness that is telling us this. And the point, the danger zone here is when consciousness is so full, is drenched in the identification of, this is such a pleasurable feeling. This is such a disgusting feeling. That no longer means that consciousness is now inert, because it has now taken on the colors, identified itself with this thing, which now has turned into an actual feeling for which the mind is now developed craving towards. That's where tanha comes in, and we are hooked. It's like the bait that we have taken, like a fish on a hook. We've bitten into the hook and taken the bait. Bhikkhu, on account of neither painful nor pleasurable contact, there arises a neither painful nor a pleasurable feeling, and one knows, I feel neither pain nor pleasure, because the person is identifying. These are not me. Yes, I'm feeling the heat. I am feeling the smell that is displeasing, shall we say. I'm feeling it, but I'm not taking it to heart. I understand. I'm not dead, I'm seeing, I'm sensing these things. But with the cessation of that neither painful nor pleasurable contact, the respective neither painful nor pleasurable feeling also ceases right there on the spot. This is exactly what the Buddha was saying to Bāhiya in the previous sutta that we did. Bāhiya, when seeing something, just see. When hearing something, just hear. When smelling, when touching, just see it for what it is and let it move on. And one knows that it has subsided. Bhikkhu, it is just like when two pieces of dry wood are rubbed repeatedly against each other, that there arises heat and fire. And when the pieces of wood are removed from one another, the respective heat and fire ceases and subsides. In the same manner, on account of a pleasurable contact, there arises a pleasurable feeling, and one knows, I feel pleasure. With the cessation of that pleasurable contact, the respective pleasurable feeling also ceases. So basically, the Buddha is repeating here what we just covered, because again, this is so important. And one knows that it has subsided. On account of a painful contact, there arises a painful feeling, and one knows, I feel pain. With the cessation of that painful contact, the respective painful feeling also ceases, and one knows that it has subsided. On account of a neither painful nor pleasurable contact, there arises neither a painful nor a pleasurable feeling, and one knows, I feel neither pain nor pleasure. With the cessation of that neither painful nor pleasurable contact, the respective neither painful nor pleasurable feeling also ceases, and one knows that it has subsided. Then what is left is equanimity, that is purified and clean, superbly malleable and wieldy, always radiant. And if you've ever listened to sutta from the Nikāyas, you would know that Lord Buddha loves analogies, metaphors, similes, we call it. Here's another one coming up. Suppose, Bhikkhu, a skilled goldsmith or his apprentice, who by building a furnace would fire it up, and taking a pair of pincers would place the gold in the crucible within the furnace. And from time to time, he would continue by adding more heat to it, sprinkling water on it from time to time, while being attentive to it throughout. This is interesting because when I was a child, I was, child labor, I guess. And growing up in Lebanon, when I was about 11, 12, I had gone to learn the business or art of goldsmithing. So I was taken on as an apprentice, and I was taught how to make jewelry. So one of the toughest parts of the craft is to gather the shavings or the dust of the gold, and putting it in with some chemicals inside of a crucible, and putting it in this furnace, which we would heat it up. And eventually they trusted me enough that I was doing it right, that I was doing it a few times actually. And one thing that I remember, the person who was teaching me came in and would check was whether I had sufficient amount of heat added ever so often. And there was a thing that we used to call it the finger, and it's made out of basically a clay, so it looks like a finger. So you would hold it with the pincers or the tongs, and you would dab it inside the liquidy, now liquid because of the heat, the gold, and we would gently stir it once or twice and remove that. As we removed it, all the dross, all the impurities would stick to that. And we would put that aside. And now what you had in the crucible was the pure gold. So, but the heat had to be constant, and we would always have to come back. We couldn't expose it to air or coolness, otherwise it would really, tear up the crucible sometimes, or just have us to do it all over again. So that image is, so true. And the Buddha continues, and from time to time, he would continue by adding more heat to it. It's 2,600-year-old, simile. It's so true. Sprinkling water on it from time to time, while being attentive to it throughout. The gold, meanwhile, becomes purified, cleaned, and refined of all its impurities, becoming radiant, superbly malleable and wieldy, and suitable to be made into any ornaments the goldsmith or his apprentice would desire, such as anklets, rings, earrings, or a gold chain. In the same manner, what is left is equanimity that is purified and clean, superbly malleable and wieldy, always radiant. Then one knows and understands the following. If I were to direct this equanimity that is purified and bright to the dimension of infinite space, and thus develop the mind in such a suitable way that it continuously promotes equanimity to be settled in it, then I would remain in that state for a very long time. Here, Lord Buddha is talking about the arupa jhanas, specifically the fifth jhana, the realm of, or dimension of infinite space. And if you remember, Pukkusāti is sitting in the fourth jhana, which would eventually get him into the fifth jhana, but he hadn't gotten to the fifth jhana. Perhaps he did, and Lord Buddha knew with his mind. So this is also a precautionary measure that the Buddha is kind of forewarning Pukkusāti about. Because even though you might go into this even more blissful state of infinite space, you might stay there. You will stay there for a very, very long time, especially after death, but you're going to fall back down into a womb when that credit runs out. And the Buddha lists the other arupa jhanas here. And if I were to direct this equanimity, that means the bhikkhu who is practicing and having reached that state of equanimity, direct this equanimity that is purified and bright to the dimension of infinite consciousness, and thus develop the mind in such a suitable way that it continuously promotes equanimity to be settled in it, then I would remain in that state for a very long time. This is the sixth arupa jhana, the sixth jhana, actually. And if I were to direct this equanimity that is purified and bright to the dimension of nothingness, and thus develop the mind in such a suitable way that it continuously promotes equanimity to be settled in it, then I would remain in that state for a very long time. And if I were to direct this equanimity that is purified and bright to the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, and thus develop the mind in such a suitable way that it continuously promotes equanimity to be settled in it, then I would remain in that state for a very long time. However, with the development of wisdom, one understands the following. So basically the Buddha says, don't do these things when you have the tendency to be pulled into these arupa jhanas. Because one after the other, they're even more sublime than the one before. That is not the objective. Because, here we go, all these lofty states of mind are in fact conditional. They rely on conditions. So, this person works to stay away from generating any new conditions, not producing any desires for becoming or non-becoming. And one lives by not clinging to anything in the world. By not grasping onto anything in the world, he no longer gets worried nor agitated. And by not getting agitated anymore, one personally comes to taste the truth of Nibbana. Here one knows birth is destroyed. The holy life has now been fully lived. What should be done is now done. There is nothing more to do, nor a cause for more future becoming. And the commentaries say how here is where Pukkusāti attained the third level, meaning he became an anagami with fruition stage. And at this part of the explanation, when the Buddha talked about the wisdom part, which is the truth of Nibbana. Here, while feeling pleasant feelings, one knows this is impermanent and is no more pulled into it, nor does one hold on to it, and thus no longer delights in it. While feeling painful feelings, one knows this is impermanent and is no more pulled into it, nor does one hold on to it, and thus no longer delights in it. While feeling neither painful nor pleasant feelings, one knows this is impermanent and is no more pulled into it, nor does one hold on to it, and thus no longer delights in it. Whether feeling pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant feelings, one experiences them without becoming wrapped up in them, nor overtaken by them. They're no longer identifying them as these are me. When experiencing a pleasurable feeling, one does so while being released from that pleasant feeling, right there on the spot. You identify that it's a pleasurable feeling. Okay, fine, let's move on. Oh, it's a disgusting smell. Okay, fine, let's move on. This is leaving consciousness pure and clean, just like that gold we talked about. When experiencing a painful feeling, one does so while being released from that painful feeling. When experiencing a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, one does so while being released from that feeling. And when the time comes and the body breaks down, one knows, I am experiencing the body breaking down. And when one feels the end of life approaching, one knows, I am experiencing the end of my life. And with the body breaking down and the ending of life fast approaching, one knows, whatever I am experiencing now at the breakup of this body, and despite all that is taking place with the ending of life itself, all that is felt and experienced, the mind nevertheless remains aloof, not being wrapped up nor delighting in. For all these are now cooled and subdued right here. One of the crucial things that a person on their deathbed needs to do, definitely, is not to become identified with these elements. Because as the body is breaking down, we're going through the elements stage by stage, sometimes very quickly, sometimes very slowly. But one might feel the intensity of the earth element, like crushing solid over them, or feeling the body disintegrating, like as if in water, drowning, etc. And if the mind is not ready, the person might become overwhelmed and become identified at that crucial moment. So if and when you are in such a situation or in the presence of someone undergoing these things, it's good to help them navigate through it without getting wet by these elements, identified by these elements, and keeping the consciousness clean. Otherwise, they will be headed towards another birth. Bhikkhu, think of an oil lamp that burns on the condition that there is sufficient oil and a wick to keep it burning. And when these are no more, due to the lack of fuel to support it, the light from the oil lamp is extinguished. Similarly, when experiencing a pleasurable feeling, one does so while being released from that pleasant feeling or pleasurable feeling. When experiencing a painful feeling, one does so while being released from that painful feeling. When experiencing a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, one does so while being released from that feeling. And when the time comes and the body breaks down, one knows, I am experiencing the body breaking down. And one feels the end of life approaching, one knows, I am experiencing the end of my life. And with the body breaking down and the ending of life fast approaching, one knows, whatever I am experiencing now at the breakup of this body, and despite all that is taking place with the ending of life itself, all that is felt and experienced, the mind nevertheless remains aloof, not being wrapped up nor delighting in. For all these are now cooled and subdued right here. By possessing this level of wisdom, the bhikkhu is declared as one endowed with the highest resolution of wisdom. For this is the highest noble wisdom, that is, the knowledge of the complete destruction of suffering. His release is now firmly established in truth that is now unshakable. By the way, this is the Buddha's way of confirming the state of anagami that Venerable Pukkusāti just attained. Because he saw with his mind that Venerable Pukkusāti has now reached the third level of awakening and the fruition level of it, meaning anagami, non-returner. And then Lord Buddha continues, know this, bhikkhu, all that deviates from truth is deceptive, therefore is no truth at all. All that does not deviate from truth is the truth, which is nibbana, that remains non-deceptive. Therefore, the bhikkhu is declared as one endowed with the highest resolution of truth. For this bhikkhu is the highest noble truth, that is nibbana, which has a non-deceptive nature. In the past, owing to his ignorance, one went after various attachments, developing many unhealthy habits. But now he has abandoned them all, uprooted and cut them down like palm tree stumps, never to have them grow again. By the way, this example of a metaphor of a palm tree stump, if you ever cut a palm tree, it never grows back. And it's kind of sad. When I was growing up, I was trying to water a palm tree that was cut and it didn't grow. Then I come across the Pali Canon and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So it's just a wonderful metaphor, because once it's cut, it will never grow back. Therefore, the bhikkhu is declared as one endowed with the highest resolution of giving up. For this, bhikkhu is the highest noble act of giving up, renunciation basically. That is, the giving up of all earlier attachments and unhealthy habits. In the past, owing to his ignorance, one was covetous, lustful, and passionate. But now he has abandoned them all, uprooted and cut them down like palm tree stumps, never to have them grow again. In the past, owing to his ignorance, one became angry, living with ill will and hatred. But now he has abandoned them all, uprooted and cut them down like palm tree stumps, never to have them grow again. In the past, owing to his ignorance, one was foolish and deluded. But now he has abandoned them all, uprooted and cut them down like palm tree stumps, never to have them grow again. Therefore, the bhikkhu is declared as one endowed with the highest resolution of peace. For this, bhikkhu is the supremely noble resolution of peace, that is, the pacification of lust, anger, and delusion. This is what was meant by the statement, one diligently protects truth by no longer neglecting wisdom, while developing a deeper understanding of giving up and training oneself in becoming more peaceful. And what was meant by the statement, when confronted by them, one should not get flooded by these imaginings, and when no longer preoccupied by these notions, thus, one is declared as the peaceful sage. Bhikkhu, the notion I am is an imagining. I am this is an imagining. I will be is an imagining. I will not be is an imagining. I will possess a form is an imagining. And this is in reference to being reborn in the form realms. I will be formless is an imagining, and that is in the arupa lokas, where there is no form, is an imagining. And by the way, the Pali word imagining is manjana, which we always do. When we have sanya, it doesn't usually stay as perception or concept or memory. We build on it, we play with it. And that's called imaginings, which soon enough goes into the area of sankharas, where we have huge mansions built out of these sanya. I will be able to perceive, or I will be unable to perceive, is also an imagining. I will be neither able to perceive nor will I be unable to perceive is also an imagining. Bhikkhu, imagining is itself a disease, a virus, a poisonous dart. But by overcoming all imaginings, by putting an end to them, and by no longer being preoccupied by these notions, one is declared as the peaceful sage. So get rid of sanya. Don't go falling for it. Bhikkhu, this peaceful sage is not born, does not age, does not die. He does not get agitated, and he no longer has any yearning. The reason for this, Bhikkhu, is that there is nothing found in the Bhikkhu that would lead him to be reborn. Not being born, how can he then age? Not aging, how can he then die? When there is no more death, how can he then become agitated? When no longer agitated, how can there be any yearnings left? Bhikkhu, this is what was meant with the statement. When confronted by them, one should not get flooded by these imaginings. And when no longer preoccupied by these notions, thus, one is declared as the peaceful sage. Therefore, Bhikkhu, remember this as my short classification on the 6 elements. Short. For us, it might be very long. Some people have said, why Venerable Pukkusāti was only, and so he reached the stage of anagami, which is not arahantship. But one thing that we need to remember is that the Lord Buddha gave, when he gave it full. He didn't hold back ever. He gave the whole thing, the whole path that would take a person straight to arahantship. Now, what the person does with that Dhamma is up to their capacity. And here's the image that was presented in commentaries. It's a lovely image, and it's they say, imagine a young, healthy king, a ruler, who is having lunch. He's tasting the most delicious, I guess, biryani. Delicious, aromatic rice, all kinds of good stuff in there. So he takes morsels of food that fit his hand for an adult. So he eats them. And the queen gives the prince to the king to sit, to have him sit on his lap. And the prince is now sitting on the lap of his father. And the king is so happy that he gives another morsel of food to, this time, the prince, the child, whose mouth, by the way, is a lot smaller than the king's. But the king, in his generosity, he has his whole hand full, and he's slowly putting portions of the food into the mouth of the child, as much as the child could handle it. Similarly, anybody else other than Pukkusāti, whose merits and paramis might have been at the level of an arahant, ready to become an arahant, that is, would have become an arahant with this message, with this Dhātuvibhaṅga Sutta. But he didn't. But he got pretty close, as we're going to see. It's not bad becoming an anagami at all. So please bear that in mind. Then at that point, because this was at dawn, at that point, the Buddha no longer kept his 6-colored radiance incognito. And he appeared in his old glory. And the whole workshop lit up. And because already he had Venerable Pukkusāti, he didn't need that, but with the realization of Venerable Pukkusāti that, now I know whose presence I'm in. At that point, to kind of complete that whole picture, Lord Buddha appeared in his in his full presence, shall we say, with his radiance of the 6 colored body hues. Let's continue. Then the Venerable Pukkusāti realized, surely my teacher, the Sugata, the one well gone, the perfectly self-awakened one, has come to me. And he quickly got up from his seat, arranged his upper robe over one shoulder, and bowed by placing his head at the feet of the Blessed One, and declared, Bhante, pardon me. See, now he's not saying friend. He says, Bhante, pardon me for my foolishness, for I was deluded, and I committed an unwholesome act, as I, without thinking properly, transgressed by addressing the Blessed One as friend. Bhante, please forgive me, and may the Blessed One accept my transgression as a transgression, as I will make amends in accordance with the Dhamma, and from now on and into the future, I shall exercise much restraint. Then the Blessed One replied, it was indeed a transgression, Bhikkhu, owing to foolishness and your delusion, as you committed an unwholesome act, when, without thinking properly, you transgressed by addressing me as friend. But as you now see and recognize your mistake and ask forgiveness accordingly by making amends in accordance with the Dhamma, I pardon you. For Bhikkhu, it is indeed progress and growth in the Blessed One's discipline when someone sees one's transgression and asks for pardon in order to exercise restraint from now and into the future. Then the Venerable Pukkusāti said, Bhante, I seek to receive the higher ordination from the Blessed One. He wanted to become full-on ordained. Bhikkhu, are your bowl and robes complete? Bhante, my bowl and robes are not complete. Bhikkhu, the Tathagatas do not give the higher ordination when the bowl and robes are incomplete. And here is interesting because you've had other incidents, like in the case, many cases. One in particular is when Venerable Sariputta, before he became, when he was Upatissa, and Kolita, who later became Mahamoggallana, when both of these individuals, close friends, were approaching Venerable, Lord Buddha, in the earlier days, Buddha recognized them as his chief disciples. They were going to be chief disciples of his. And he turned to the other bhikkhus and he says, behold, these are the chief disciples of mine that are approaching. And as they approached, they bowed down, and Buddha did, without any question, he said, come, bhikkhus, come. That was it. That was their full novice and high ordination immediately. And what we hear is, what we see is immediately bowls appeared and the 3 sets of robes appeared in front of them. But we don't see that in Pukkusāti's case. In fact, Lord Buddha asks him, hey, where are your robes? Do you have alms bowl? Oh, so if you don't have it, then. So what's the discrepancy here? There's been many explanations, but the one that really makes sense to me is the one that involves the person in question having that life be the very last of theirs, meaning to attain arahantship within that life. That was the case with Venerable Sariputta, that was the case with Venerable Mahamoggallana, etc. So, but that was not the case here, as we will soon find out. Then the Venerable Pukkusāti, delighting in the words of the Blessed One, got up from his seat, and after paying homage to the Blessed One, and while keeping him to his right, meaning he circumambulated, he turned around Lord Buddha 3 times, came out of the potter's workshop and went searching for a bowl and a set of robes. It was now dawn. Now remember, this person was a king, and he was not just any king, he was King Bimbisara's friend king. So he could have easily gone to King Bimbisara's court and say, hey, friend, buddy, can I borrow, like, can you give me a bowl? Or he could have gone to his ministers or his businessmen where they would have their own place, let's say, like a caravanserai, where they would go and rest. So he didn't want to use any of his prestige from leftover days of being king, in kingship. Instead, he went to the charnel grounds, to the cremation grounds, to collect his robes from discarded robes, to find a bowl from there. And and while he was looking for his bowl and robes, a wild and deranged cow came running at him and gored him with her horns, and thus killing Venerable Pukkusāti. This is a very similar incident that happened also, if you remember, to Bāhiya after he became an arahant. Another cow came, it probably was the same cow, but the commentaries say that they had done a very atrocious thing in a very distant past. Him, Bāhiya, and another person who used to be friends, and now I guess the karma was catching up to them. And this is what happens when a person really nears the end of their journey, spiritual journey. It kind of like bottlenecks. Many of the heavy duty kammas, they start to come to fruition, as it were. And so as was the case here. And killing Venerable Pukkusāti. So so Venerable Pukkusāti, because the cow was lifting him up, he flew and he just landed on his face. But they say that his body was so beautiful, even lying down, it was almost like a golden statue laying face down in the charnel ground. And a touching moment occurs when, so basically Lord Buddha is sending his radiance, so everybody's now congregating towards the Bhagava's, the potter's workshop. So the news goes all the way to King Bimbisara, who rushes early in the morning to go and see his teacher, Lord Buddha. He doesn't have a clue about Pukkusāti meanwhile. He doesn't know what has happened to him. All he knows, he sent the gift over of the Dhamma, and that's it. And this is where Lord Buddha relates the question, not the question, but reports to him, tells him about what had happened to Pukkusāti after he sent him the gift of Dhamma and how he had reached here. Meanwhile, you can imagine King Bimbisara becoming very emotional and very happy at the same time that his friend was so moved that he took on the robes. And he left his kingdom, something that King Bimbisara could not do, by the way, despite the fact that he was Sotapanna. And King Pukkusāti, was not. So, and Lord Buddha tells him that Pukkusāti has now reached the third stage. At this point, King Bimbisara is, beside himself in happiness, in joy. And he asks, well, where is my friend, Lord? And Buddha says he has gone to get his bowl and robes, searching for them. He doesn't say to him that he's dead immediately. But then he once he settles down, and that's when the Buddha breaks the news to him that he has died to King Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara is really distraught, but he sends his guards to look all around his city, and they find the golden statue-like body of King Pukkusāti on the ground. So later, many bhikkhus approached the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, sat to one side and reported the matter by saying, meanwhile, the Buddha has gone back to Savatthi. Bhante, the clansman Pukkusāti, to whom the Blessed One taught the Dhamma in brief, has died. What was his destination, Blessed One? Where is he now reborn, Bhante? Bhikkhus, the clansman Pukkusāti is wise. He realized the Dhamma, as he did not require me to explain much. The clansman Pukkusāti has destroyed the 5 lower fetters that bind one to the sensual world. and as a result has now been born spontaneously in the pure abodes, where he will attain final Nibbana without ever returning from that world. This is what the Blessed One said, and all those bhikkhus listening were delighted in the words of the Blessed One. Sad, sad, sad. So, by the way, King Pukkusāti, shortly after landing in the Aviha realm of the Suddhavasa dimension of, he became an arahant. So that's a good thing. So he and Suddhavasa, and it was the lowest of the 5 worlds. And this is a series of 5 realms where only anagamis are reborn into. No one can be reborn in them unless they are of that level, where basically they have cut the 5 lower fetters. And they will never fall back from that realm, as we saw Buddha saying. So some people, they attain it at landing into these realms. Some people have to live for some time in these realms. And during those times they can attain. And some people, they will finish that time in that realm and move up to another realm. And during that transition, again in the same anagami realms, they can't fall back. So they can go higher. In those realms, in landing in those realms, they can attain it, or in between, or even in between this life and the rebirth into any of these pure abodes. So not a bad deal at all. So it's as you know, it was a long sutta, but I tried my best in anyhow. Any questions or comments while I get some water? Please go ahead and speak. No thoughts, no questions?
Bhante, just a quick, more of a translation question. In the version, the Bhikkhu Bodhi version I look out, he uses the word resolution when they're talking about, foundation. You use the word resolution, the 4 of those.
Yes.
And so neither of those words have a great translation in my mind, so I know exactly what they are. So just to say it a different way, would it be similar to a basis of thinking? Is that what you mean by a resolution or a foundation? How else would you describe those words so I know what it is meant?
I would like the basis of thinking itself. However, there is a strong similarity with the mind part, the mind contact, which we were talking base of mind. So that is, which was in the beginning part of the exposition itself. So if I were to use that, even in my thinking, let's say, it might be confusing. So I would encourage you to find perhaps a bridge term between resolution and foundation. Because other individuals have used resolution, and that comes actually from, I use a lot for inspiration, the work or works of Sister Upalavanna. She was a German nun in the 19th century, late 19th century. She went to Sri Lanka. So there is a strong presence of her translation in all of the Western translations I've seen in English. So a lot of it is played out, including in the wisdom publications, many of these. And so she's the one that uses also resolution. And checking the Pali, I found it to resonate better with that resolution. Now, resolution can also be, it's not necessarily a resolve, a state of determination, which is still, it has this active energy force behind it, this impetus perhaps, but more approaching it as a station where the person has reached finally, after having gone through such an ordeal of going and dissecting through each of these elements and seeing oneself that, whoa, the mind has finally reached this state of aloofness beyond the domain, of the elements. So now the mind has, in a sense, broken free, because these are four. There's the part of the wisdom, there's the nibbana or the truth, there's the giving up or renunciation, and finally there is the peace or the pacification states. Now, having said that, I always encourage us to go beyond what words, despite even the Pali words that we use so often. Sometimes even the Pali is not helpful. In my translations, I always use several terms to kind of help me. That's why today, for example, you probably caught that, where I said consciousness. And then within parentheses, I say, or sense awareness. Because it can easily turn into something very heady, cognitive, and a perception, a concept. And the sense awareness part comes from my own practice as a meditator, especially with the influence of Ajahn Mun and Ajahn Mahabua, for example, who present consciousness in that fashion. Because that's one of the reasons why I love them, because they really brought the teaching back to life, in a sense, in the form that it became more alive, practice-based. It was no longer pariyatti, which is the teaching or the studying of the Dhamma, but it became patipada or patipatti, which is the practice part of the Dhamma. Now, when we take these terms and we put it under the litmus test of practice, suddenly it is up to the practitioner to play with these terms. Because let's face it, in textual analysis, etc., over the years, as one does these things, we can see the influence that human beings have had. So I'm not of the mindset of blind belief of the Dhamma that we get, even in the Pali Canon, that it is purely, exactly 100% the teachings of the Buddha. No. There's chunks and chunks of things that don't belong there. However, the majority of it is, and it's the closest thing to the actual words of the Buddha, as evidenced by the practice of it and its reflection that we see coming in pure reflection from the Vinaya portion. Because we don't see the suttas only as the source of teachings, but also the Vinaya. And the Buddha always triangulated these three. And in the book of threes, I believe, in the Anguttara Nikāya, numerical discourses, the Buddha says how it's important, actually, the reference in the book of four. The Buddha says how one needs to go back and use these. The Dhamma, yes, even if a person says, yes, I heard this straight from the mouth of the Buddha, or from his enlightened Arya Savakas. Okay, he says, don't accept it, don't deny it either. Go and check it in the Vinaya. But most importantly, go and check it with your assiduous, dedicated practice. Test it there to see if this term actually does sense. And many of these terms that I've seen in the modern translations, many of them, not all of them, don't make sense for me as a practitioner. That's why I decided a few years ago to go ahead and, because it was keeping me away from delving into the suttas, because I was intimidated from the suttas because I couldn't make sense of it. The word concentration, for example, I struggled with it for over 15 years. And that's a conservative number of years. Because concentrate. How can I concentrate and attain wisdom, insight? How is that possible? It's impossible, because I'm fixating my mind to a single point at the exclusion of everything else. But when you look at the satipatthana in a different way, you look at pasambati, you look at tranquilizing the body, relaxing. Now we're getting somewhere. And that was introduced specifically, mostly by Venerable Punnaji, who passed away initially. And that relaxed step suddenly opened up my world. And it was so quick because I suddenly fell into the first jhana. And I had been sitting for over 20 years, mind you, struggling. And I didn't know what this was because I thought this is impossible for me to experience the jhana, because people had told me and taught me that no. You have to go to a monastery in the mountains and practice for 40 years. 40 years to experience the jhanas, of even the first one. So concentration was in itself, I'm just using that as an example, and a definition. It was used, and it's still unfortunately being used as a definition for samadhi. And it's an antiquated term, and it should not be used at all, because yes, there's an element of concentration somewhere in the vast ocean that is samadhi, but it's a small portion of the practice of samadhi. The collectedness of mind has a fuller meaning. Stability of mind, that's where insight and wisdom can take place. So I hope I'm not going on a tangent from what you were inquiring about, but that is how I would approach it. So the resolution versus foundation. A foundation for me means like somewhere that I'm starting off from. It's like the launching pad, launching site or springboard. From this, I can move up, when this is not the case. Because these are states that the person is reaching after having done their due diligence, working on exposing these different layers of a person's life, meaning the elements, etc. How is this so far? Does this make
Well, it's perfect what you are saying, that I need to consider a whole range of different words, because that's exactly the problem I'm having when I look at now more than one word. I'm still not getting the essence of, I think, what it is. But what you just said then being the end goal that we're reaching after that thinking, I haven't come up with a single word for that, but that's, and I see resolution is a good word for that. So now I understand a lot better your use of the word resolution. It makes more sense to me. So thank you. Great.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I'm glad. And again, another one would be like a station. I think comes to mind in Costa Rica. One time I was there once, and I did a zip line thing, and we started from near the ground level at one point, and I'm like, wait a minute, I heard this, like we're going to go on the top of trees, over the canopy. The trees are here, like where are we going? And then as we went, the terrain changed. Meanwhile, we were going up, in a sense, in different areas. There were trucks and things, four-wheelers, that were quadrupeds, or I forgot the name of it, and they would take us higher. And finally, we reached the apex of the thing, and we started going from one station to the next, zip-lining through the jungle. And then that was a station. That's, I guess a resolution in this case, a station, a way station. But I wouldn't say necessarily a way station, because these four have to be there to bring about the peaceful stage that the Lord Buddha was talking about. Because they are they're different facets of the same diamond. I cannot remove one of the facets and say there's the diamond, because the giving up, the relinquishing part has to be there. I cannot hold on to things. I cannot hold on to fame, prestige, properties if I am truly practicing. Sooner or later, I have to give them up as a bhikkhu or as a practitioner. So things have to come off. You know, it's like the metamorphosis of a butterfly, from a worm to a butterfly. It's giving up. Now, can the butterfly go back in being a worm in that life? No. So that would be a resolution, the state of butterflyness, I would say, versus it when it had not gone through the metamorphosis, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Wonderful question.
Thank you.
Any thoughts, comments, questions? Anyone else?
Thanks very much for the explanation, Bhante. It appears to me that this is a very complete sutta in many sense. It encompasses many aspects of the Dhamma, like this 6 great elements, the Salayatanas, Panchakhandas, and even the Asubha aspects, for example. And it appears to me that when the Buddha explains the fire elements as basically the digestive fire that is within our body, I find it actually quite beneficial to consider, to also include the inner fire elements as anything to do with passion, pride, restlessness, conceit, lobha, dosa, moha. I mean, these are the fires that really occupy our mind, that needs to be relinquished with relaxation. So I would like to hear your opinion on that.
Yes, thank you for that. Exposing us to that from that point of view, looking at the elements and specific the fire. Absolutely. The word that the Buddha used, in English we use the term dispassion, and it's viraga. In this case, going beyond V. Sometimes it's non-something, so non-passion or dispassion. It's up to you how you use it, but essentially it's the same thing, where the passion, if you've ever seen a person get angry, or a person, miserliness, I was mentioning miserliness a few times today, holding on to things. This is mine. I'm not going to let you, use my house, my temple, my car, my this, or I'm not going to give my 5 minutes to listen to you. What that is generating is this, even blood pressure is rising, I would say, and the body temperature is rising, and passion itself is a mentally heated, fiery experience. Even the temperature, body temperature rises when we are being passionate. Before we get to the tunnel vision, that's what's happening, because it's affecting your adrenaline, it's affecting your executive brain function. You're going into the fight or flight mode, in a sense. So all these things do take place. And what does get to be definitely left out is panya, wisdom. Hence, the Buddha's use of, in this case, the word cooling down. What gets to be cooled down? Something that is warm, something that is hot. Try to microwave some food and for a long time, and then pull it out and see whether you're going to be able to hold it with your fingers. Why? And living a life that, as people, we're exposed to different influences, and even that friction can generate some heat. Oftentimes I get the question, why do we sit? Why do we have to meditate? Well, because you are trying to cool down, literally. And the Buddha also demonstrated this in the beginning part of the sutta, where he did not engage in a conversation. He allowed Pukkusāti to cool down, just like he did allow Bāhiya in the previous sutta we did to cool down as he asked the same question again and again. Bhante, please teach me the Dhamma. And the Buddha says, now is not the time, Bāhiya. Of course, it's always the time for Dhamma. What are you talking about? Of course. But it was not the right time for Bāhiya's mind, because he was too hot. The mind, so it doesn't necessarily mean just raga, dosa, moha, or the three defilements, lobha, dosa, moha, that generate passion. It could also be overexhaustion, because there is the state of deludedness. And this is where the defilements can really take over. Because when we just focus on the raga portion, well, what's going to happen with the dosa, which is the second, the hatred, the ill will, the anger? Isn't that hot? But where do these two come from, lobha or raga and dosa? They come from their mother, I call it always. Mother is what? Moha, the delusion. So sitting to meditate, to cool down, is to wipe the windows from the fogginess that has been created, where we cannot see what's outside, what's inside. We cannot properly translate with a cool head what's happening to us and around us. So for the very simple reason, I mean, you can even use that to explain to people why we sit and meditate, to create that space, that separation, like Venerable Sariputta, or in this case, Lord Buddha was talking about, the breaking the body into its different parts. Now, one good thing that you could do is when there is a strong heat, a strong fiery attachment to, let's say, passions, etc., this breakdown of the 6 elements, especially the 5 of them, minus the consciousness part, it's very helpful to use any of these, let's say the solid, the earth element, and send your mind to that area. Let's say your knees, let's say your jaw, your throat, your back, your scapula, your shoulder blades, your feet, or your stomach. Maybe you've had too much to eat or nothing to eat, so you're very, very hungry. Send your awareness, send your mindfulness, your sati there, and dwell there. Just explore without adding anything, just exploring the different nuances, the different aspects of that, in this case, stomach, let's say, the organ, or yeah. And then all of a sudden you start seeing the other elements there in it as well. The stomach also has some fluid. It has hydrochloric acid type, almost that low pH level. It breaks bones, dissolves things. So it also generates heat. Interesting. We started with the earth element though. But it also is vacuous. It has a space in it where the food gets dumped. Okay, we're seeing that. So there's motion, which is the wind element. Okay. So within one organ that we started with one element, you are dissecting and seeing it as being a representative of all the other elements. And then you pull that stomach out and you put it in front of you and you're dissecting it, but you do it at your own comfort. Meanwhile, what is happening underneath is you are slowly giving up those facets I mentioned about the diamond, whether it's Nibbana, wisdom, Nibbana, the truth of Nibbana, being non-deceptive, basically. The giving up, the renunciation, or the peace, they are taking place in the background. So you're passing the point of getting to the point of passing the point of no return, using any of these tools. And remember, any of these things, any of these guides that the Buddha gave Pukkusāti, could deliver a person to arahantship. So thank you for that question. And I've been talking for, yes, quite some time, but again, anything for Dhamma, but again, we have to take care of the body apparently while observing it and the elements. So again, if you do have questions, my encouragement is that you, again, review it, you play it, or you read the suttas, however you want to do it, go over them again and take one piece, take it with you into your meditation if you want, or when in your walk, going outside walking, or any sensation that comes in to the body. Ooh, what was that feeling I'm having, whether physical or emotional? What is it? If I were to put a label of an element on it, which element would this be? And use sati there, but don't let it just stay with the sati level. Continuous sati opens doors for panya to take place. And let's stop it at the consciousness level or the sense awareness so that we don't end up in another womb again, ever. So we'll stop here and I'll do the dedication of merit. This time I'll do it in Pali. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahittika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu lokasasanam. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahittika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu desanam. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahittika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mam param. Ittavata chamehi sambadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Ittavata chamehi sambadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Ittavata chamehi sambadang punya sampadang sabbe sattanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Be well. May the triple gem bless you and protect you. One who lives with the Dhamma is protected by the Dhamma. Let's not forget that. So may you all be well, and I'll see you next week. Take care.